Welcome back. Happy World Goth Day. No, I'm not wearing this because of World Goth Day. I wear this all the time. In fact, I've probably worn it for far too long right now, as of the last couple days. But today, I'm going to show you my live setup. Ins and outs, machine choices, reasons why, all kinds of stuff like that. I try to keep it less than this, but doing a live broadcast for Industry Brunch, which is a party I play in Detroit on the regular, but this year not happening. So I've added sort of an extra machine that I normally don't bring anymore, just because it was sort of kind of quintessential for that party. But anyway, I will show you all the ins and outs and the machines and why and choices and how they're hooked up. Excuse me. And let me transition to the other camera. All right, so here, Access Virus A. The Access Virus A has been around in my setup since 1997. It's sort of quintessential to how I operate. Chords, crazy sounds, a lot of polyphonic sounds. I control it with the Social Entropy Engine right here. Social Entropy Engine is sort of the best way to describe it would be a baby Circlon. Very machine-like, no menus, all buttons, combination presses of buttons. Basically like a super duper 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 sort of 80s Roland type sequencer, except with tons and tons and tons of new features and 4-voice polyphony per track. I use it specifically for two things. I use it for the virus to do sequencing and poly patches, etc., and chords and stuff like that. And I use it all the way over here for the Future Retro MB30, the MB33 Retro, which is a 303 engine with no sequencer. So having something that was originally based on like a super steroided 303 drive a 303 engine is sort of a perfect combination. It doesn't look normal because I replaced the case, which should look like this. It's a really nice steel case, but it's also very heavy for travel. So when I travel with stuff, I try to take it apart, strip every possible superfluous thing off of it to cut weight down, because A, it allows me to not be charged overweight baggage, and B, fly on airlines that make it even more affordable for people to bring me. So there's your business tip for today. If you can cut weight, you're able to fly and travel cheaper. If we ever travel again in other countries, who knows? Anyway, that's why it looks different than stock. So we'll go through from here all the way over, and I'll introduce the players. MB33 Retro, Novation circuit. Under here, FMR RNC compressor that is on the master outs from this Mackie 1402. I practice and travel locally with a Mackie 1402 because it's pretty much available everywhere on the planet, and if you need a specific mixer, you're also then making it harder for people to book you and making it harder to sound good. So if you can be good on something that's super basic and super not prolific, but is everywhere, then you're gaming the system in your favor on every aspect. So after the Mackie, we go to a Korg ES2 Electribe sampler. Super handy, very shat upon because people want to sweat the electron stuff. Was very overlooked and was very under promoted by Korg. I love it. It does amazing things. I've done whole tracks on it, and in a live setup, it's a great machine. Up here, Arturia Microbrute. This is the extra machine that I added just for this live streaming performance. I used to have two. This one never leaves the studio because it was a gift from my wife. And the other one I used to travel with, so it was just a plain black one. And I used to almost destroy it, but not out of hand. So it's sort of part of the sound for Industry Brunch. So I thought I would pull it out for this particular performance. A Boss DD7 delay pedal. Super basic, does exactly what I want it to do. I plug in 3 chords, a mono in, a stereo out. It immediately automatically ping pongs. I send it right to send number 1 on the Mackie. It's perfect. It spaces out anything and gives some depth to everything. Future Retro Swinks. The Swinks, all it does is swing MIDI clock in and transmit DIN sync, MIDI clock, or pulse clock out. I use it to go to a MIDI patch bay and can then swing the sequencer on here that is being clocked via MIDI. So next up, Roland TR-8S. This guy's a beast. People, I guess, assume like, oh, it's like an 808 and a 909 and virtual. It's like, yes, and it's much, much, much more. You can put in your own samples, which makes it into a whole new machine on top of having all of the power of their modeled 808, 909, 707, etc., etc., etc. It is a great performance machine. I can't espouse it enough. People usually go 2 routes. It's either the 8S or some Electron box that they use as their main sort of driver rhythm kind of backbone. That's it. That's the whole kit and caboodle. Oh, back in here is a Digital Music Corp's MX8 patch bay. It's a 2-in, 8-out patch bay with a switch for each output. And you can switch between off, input 1, or input 2. Input 1 is from the TR-8S. Input 2 is from the Swinks. And what I do is I send the clock out from the 8S through the patch bay into the Swinks. And then from there I send it back in to the box, where then I switch only the microbrute to be swung by whatever the value is on this knob. I also use the DIN sync out to go to the engine, because even though the engine has individual swing per track, I don't want to go through too many button presses while I'm playing, so I just quick use the knob here, and I can live with the fact that this and this will be on the same swing. That's okay, because in theory there's 1, 2, 3, 4 different swings available to intermingle with one another during the performance to get some really nice timed and nice well-placed grooves. Okay, why I choose these. Virus is a massive virtual analog with 64 of the original PPG 2.3 waves. It's a massive machine that is made to function as a workhorse in multi-mode, meaning a multi-timbral MIDI mode. It addresses on channels 1 through 16, which is your basic MIDI. So I've made multi-setups that are 16 arrangements of sounds at different levels and everything. And I know exactly where they're at in what multi with these little sheets here. They correspond to sequences I have pre-made. Oh no, I said pre-made. I'm busted. Pre-made on the engine if I feel like using them, or I can choose to alter them, etc., etc. But they correspond here, and these cheat sheets tell me what snapshot. You see the big numbers at the top and the divisions of 16, and then like a quick name, and then what tracks are used and what sort of spacing there is. Straight up vertical line means do not play together. Ones that have an arrow that go up means there's a transposition. Circles are important ones, mean to be used first. Things like that. And then at the bottom of each grid, there's like an M62 or an M63. Those are what multi it corresponds with here. I could do program changes that would change with every sequence, but the less data moving around when I'm playing, the better chance that nothing will shit itself or lock up. So I just do it manually. It's easy enough for me to hit the plus minus, change the multi-setup, which gives me 16 more sounds. So I'm free to jump between 40, let me see, 48, 16, 32, 48. I have 48 riffs of sorts with multiple tracks, usually no more than 2 sounds, usually 1 sound, and I go between them. If I feel like taking a break from improvising, I can go to here, or if I remember one that really has a great feel, that's what I'm looking for, I'll just, kind of get it ready and start to transition to it so it's nice and smooth. I also use it for the MB33 Retro, as I said, and what that does is I always put that on track 7 and 8. So I know it's always the 303 track there that is either open for me to program or has something there to start with. Usually I just kind of improvise it. The first bank of 8 snapshots, I have some classic patterns that I've had around for, easily 25 years that have translated from my original TB303 through multiple machines now to this. So I have those on track 7 of the first 8 snapshots. And then track 8 is to freely improvise with 303 stuff, which the engine is also great for. So after the virus, the engine. The engine was my choice after using an Alesis MMT8 for a very, very, very long time. Originally, when I first started playing live in 1998, I used a Nakai MPC60 as my main sequencer to drive everything. Because I wasn't flying, I was playing raves around the Midwest here. And I could make one giant sequence basically and choreograph the changes on the 909, the 606, the 303. I could choreograph all of those in time with little cues, bring them in, manipulate them, turn the shit on and off, etc., etc. And what happened was I was given a really great break at a big party, primetime spot, my first primetime spot ever, and about 3 sort of riffs or progressions or songs, whatever you want to call them, in the MPC60 at 5:30 in the morning just decided to shit itself. Locked up, all the lights came on, like it was a total shitstorm. It just died. And this is mid-party. There's super thick sweat, human soup in the air. And I'm like 15 minutes into my set and people are freaking out. And it just happens to stop at the end of a measure. So people are cheering. They're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. They're screaming. And what I had to do, it was a make or break situation. So I thought fast and I quickly hooked up the 909 as master and then ran the MIDI out to my sequence, whatever MIDI was left. In fact, no, it was just the 8. It was the 909, the 606, and the 303. That's all I had left. So the 303 you can't improvise on. So it was basically the 606 and the 909, and I improvised for the remaining hour and 15 minutes. People went crazy. It was like I couldn't have done it planned better. People loved it. It was raw. It was intense. It was in the moment. There was so much energy because I was so jazzed out from everything stopping and trying to figure out just catastrophic system failure. So I played and then I realized, wow, that went great. Maybe I should do this more. And that's what started my transition into more of a off-the-cuff improvised format way back. But the whole point of it was I used to use an Alesis MMT8. This guy right here, he's been with me a very long time. He was my man for a long time, and if I open him, you'll see all the labeling that has now transferred onto those cards was all in here. Like 25 years of insanity, overlaps, and just like keep putting tape over tape over tape. All of it's in there. Very simple 8-track MIDI sequencer, but it is 96 ppq. So it does, if you make sequences on an MPC or something with more intricate timing, it records them perfectly. So you can do different swings on different tracks. It's excellent. And it was light, and they were dirt cheap. I mean, like, people gave them to me. I used to have 4 of them. They were no more than $50. So they were a perfect thing to play live with, because worst case scenario, it grew legs, it broke, you dropped it, you spilled something on it, it blew up, whatever. You're out $50, and it worked perfectly. But the only options you had were to turn the track on and off. People complain about the buttons, but you could fix them as well and clean them, so it was a great solution. Anyway, I transferred all of those, all the best ones, let's say, into this. So now that comes with me. And it's a superb sequencer. I've had no issues with it except me forgetting how to do stuff at times during the performance. Electribe 2 sampler. Why have I chose it? I used to use the first version of the Electribe sampler. It's a green one. It's 16-bit, but the sample rate was 31 kilohertz, so it gave you a little bit of down-sampled grunge at lower pitches. It punched real through. It did some really esoteric, kind of brutal, but really nice things to the samples. So you could put in chords and basses, and you could get really sweet grooves out of them really fast, off the cuff. And they did a second version, the ESX, which I didn't really like. It was too big, too heavy. It had these tubes in it, had too many problems. So when they announced a third version, which is the Electribe 2 sampler, I pre-ordered it from Sweetwater, and I'm really glad I did, because I got it. And at first I hated it because there were some timing issues, and there still are, but I've learned to live with them for other reasons. But it does some really amazing performance things that I've seen very few other things do. And it has a built-in virtual analog, which does polyphony, and you can set it in chord mode, so it's really easy to come up with melodic things off the cuff. You can change scale. The pads turn into keys, and you can play them. Sample manipulation, it's great for sample manipulation. Absolutely great. And when I say sample manipulation, I do not mean loops. I mean single shots, long sustained, drums, basses, chords, snippets, weird things. I do not mean stems. I do not mean drum loops or sample loops or things like that. It is not very good for that. It does not, as the kids say, warp to tempo. So you have to think about it from an old school perspective, where that was not even an option. That was like something you would dream about when you're bullshitting with your friends. Like, man, I wish this thing would just adjust to tempo and play the sample at whatever I'm playing. Because before that, you would have to just stay at that tempo. Whatever your samples are set to and pitched to, that's the tempo you have to stay at. There was no flexibility with tempo. This thing does a lot of great stuff. It has filters for every voice, envelopes, effects. It's pretty simple, really efficient. You can get a lot out of it, and it works really well for performance. It's great for off the cuff, and you can also set up, you can save all your mutes and all that stuff, so you can have templates to start with if you want. I don't really do that on it. I kind of use it more as just like, okay, here's my starting sound bank, and then I just run from there. Novation circuit. Very similar of sorts to the Electribe, because you can put in your own samples for the drum section. You basically have 2 6-voice polyphonic synths, and then 4 voices, mono each, of drums, with a sequencer for each. The synthesizer engine on it is very nice. That's basically what I love the most about it, and I use it for great poly sounds. I basically have it split. One voice does poly, one voice does mono, so I never forget what I'm doing. Voice 1 is always poly, voice 2 is always mono. So it's set up that way, so in the midst of the battle, I can always remember what's going on, because if you change it per song or riff or pattern, it's going to be really hard to remember when you're there and you're nervous or you're drunk or you're just out of sorts because you had an 8-hour flight and you got to play, things like that. So you want to game all of the systems to your favor, not against you, especially if you're somewhere that isn't your home turf. So great synthesizer, wavetable, all digital, virtual. All of the knobs up top here are freely assignable in their editor program, which is free as well. And if you set them all to be all the same parameters for every sound in your set, you're also then guaranteed to usually never grab the wrong knob and have something that is way out of whack happen. I mean, you always get out of whack stuff, but having way out of whack is a whole different story. And each of the knobs go 4 different ways in 4 different amounts to any parameter or the same parameter. It sort of works hand in hand with the Electribe, because where the Electribe's weak is its virtual synthesis. It's super simple, so it's fast, but it's not super complex, so you can't get a wide range of sounds out of it. This, you can get a huge variety of sounds. So its strong point to me is its synthesis and its synthesizer engines in a format this size and rugged and at a very reasonable price. So they kind of complement each other like a yin-yang sort of thing. The samples on this are very crude. You get a decay, a tune, an overdrive, and then a cut, like a low cut, high boost kind of thing. And that's it. Whereas with this, you get, bandpass, low pass, high pass filters, envelopes, effects, etc., etc., etc. So they kind of work really nice hand in hand. And they're both very powerful in different offsets of the same thing. That's the best way to put it. Microbrute. Absolutely insanely easy. You get one oscillator, one filter, one envelope, one LFO. That's it. Basically like a modern SH-101, except with a couple extra features. Rather than just your standard array of waves, you get, your sub that'll do like a fifth tuning and everywhere in between. A saw with like a super saw parameter, pulse width with PWM, and then metalizer, which is a triangle that just keeps folding and folding and folding until it gets crazy. Very simple sequencer. You get note via the keyboard and a little octave switch here and a rest, and that's it. You don't even get a tie or a slur like on the 101. It's just note or rest. Everything else is up to you, and it receives MIDI clock, so it's perfect. It's a perfect solution to an SH-101. And yes, I know they have the SH-01 now, which I probably should have gotten, but I just never have. I would love to have one. I just never got one. I had 3 regular SH-101s back in the day. I don't really have any right now, but I'm not really trying to get one either. But anyway, that's why I like it, because it was a small, cheap, more flexible alternative than a 101. So you could do the same things with it, except even more, because it has bandpass, low pass, high pass. The LFO will sync to MIDI clock, plus the wheels you can assign. And it's got a little analog patch bay up here that I use as well. Nothing crazy. That's pretty much it. Oh, the 8S. So I'm a big proponent of putting your own sounds in. It's a great performance machine. And by putting your own sounds in, it gives you the ability to not just simply have 808s, 909s, 707s, 606, etc., etc. You put in your own kicks, you put in your own snares, you put in chord samples, you put in percussion, you put in congas, you put in laser zaps, you put in everything you can possibly think of, especially non-percussive things, because then in a pinch, you're able to use your tuning, recording, I guess as people call them, parameter locks or motion sequencing. All three knobs are recordable on every channel. There is no preset as to what sounds have to go anywhere. Any sound can be in any channel of the 11, which is great. You can, whatever's comfortable for you. If you like your bass drum in the center, if you like it on the left or the right, or wherever you like it, you can assign colors. I've adapted to different colors for different sounds over the years. It's mainly due to the coloring that used to be on Hosa Snakes. The black was always the kick drum, and I always went from the darkest to the lightest. So black was always kick drum. Blue is the Virus, one of the outs. Blue, and then it would be green is the Electribe, red is the Electribe, because I run them in mono. So I use one side for the synthesis and chord samples and some, like, more importantly, like star of the show type samples. And then everything else goes out the other side. And then color-wise, gray is always hi-hats, orange are always claps, and they come out of individual outputs of the 8S. The 8S, I only run 4 outputs because most of the time it's only a 14-channel Mackie or even a 12-channel Mackie. So if I get used to running multiple outputs and needing extravagant mixers, it reduces how many gigs I can actually get, and it makes it's one more obstacle for promoters to bring me, saying, I need this specific mixer, or I need this. If you can bring as much as humanly possible with you to make it convenient for promoters, you will get more gigs, because it's less hoops they have to jump through. If you say, I need a 909 and I want a Midas Venice and I need an Eventide H3000, nobody's going to book you, because those are all extremely extravagant things that cost a lot of money now, and you're going to make it really hard for anyone to book you. When you get booked, will you sound great? Maybe. It depends if you can use it or not. Anyone can run garbage through any of those things. So whatever, you don't want to make it hard for yourself to get booked, or you don't want to make it very specific, because it makes it harder for you to adapt. I can show up, and as long as they have a 12-channel mixer, I really don't care what it is. As long as it's a 12-channel instrument mixer, it can be anything under the sun. I was in Eastern Germany one time, way back, maybe like 2005, in Halle, and they had some East German 8-channel line mixer for my mixer. It was in Russian. I couldn't read it. It had level and pan. That was it. I was like, guess that's what I'm using. And it was a great set. It was a lot of fun. So you want to be flexible. So that's sort of why I play on like an average run-of-the-mill sort of, used $150 to $200 mixer, because if you can do it on that and you can get your settings on that, it makes it really easy then when you show up and there's some less than preferential stuff for you to play on. Also, as a note, I don't travel with a mixer because mixers are everywhere. It's 100% the heaviest thing you could possibly travel with. If you're driving, no big deal. If you're flying, it will keep you poor, because you'll pay overweight baggage, and it's also bulky and totally unnecessary. I don't even travel with audio cables, because audio cables are everywhere now. So there's no reason to bring that kind of shit with you. I bring my instruments, I bring MIDI cables, and I bring a bunch of Euro to US adapters, like 12 of them or 10 of them, and they're just physical format adapters from the 2-pin Euro plug to the US plug, because almost every power supply here, short of the FMR, everyone is DC. And they're all new power supplies run anywhere from 220 voltage or 240 all the way to 100 for Japan. So it'll go the whole range of voltages all around the world. The days of I need a converter for all of my plugs to scale down or scale up voltages is practically over. I do need one for the RNC because it's an AC power because of the compression. And it's easy. People have like a hair dryer adapter or something like that. Easy enough. Plug it on, and it's the only thing on it. Everything else can be plugged in anywhere in the world as long as you can change format. In those format adapters, I think a 10-pack from Amazon was like $12 or something. So they're really easy and really simple. Everything runs on all voltages in the world now, as opposed to before where you had a big bag of power supplies that were really heavy too. Regular, linear, regulated, non-switching power supplies are very heavy. They take up a lot of weight, and they cost you a lot of money when an airline says, oh, you're overweight baggage, and you can't really take anything out. You've already taken out some of your clothes to throw away at the airport, and the only thing left is you just have to pay the overweight baggage, which is more painful than getting poked in the back with a fork, because there's no way around it, and you have to get on the flight. So making things light and engineering your life as easily as you can to make it less painful so you have a better set while you're there. That's all of it, what it is. And if you've ever seen pictures or videos of my sets, the setup usually looks the same all the time. That's because I'm a firm believer. You would have to show me some other reason. I mean, I'll change if there's a better reason, but I'm a firm believer in muscle memory. So I stand right here almost all the time, kind of sort of dead at the 8 with this on either side, the engine here and the electribe here and the virus, it's sort of like, usually this is now here, but so it's a little even more compact. But muscle memory, like a drummer sets their drums at certain points so they can play with their eyes closed. They can play in the dark. Same thing, a guitar player. Why would you move what string is in what position? The same thing holds true for electronics. You want muscle memory. You want to practice in exactly the same height, conditions, positions that you will play to the best of your power. You want to make everything exactly like that. I have this little Mighty Bright light, it's $25. You can't make a better purchase if you're going to play out on the regular. They last for about 10 years unless you break them earlier. So then if you practice in a dark room with the exact same positioning on your setup with only that light, if you show up at the club and it's a cave with one red light by the DJ, you're cool. It's like just another day, just another day on the farm. You're completely fine then. That's what you want to do. You want to make all of this as reliable as possible. It's your spaceship. You're NASA. You have to shoot this shit up 12 times into the orbit of Earth with nobody in it before you understand what it's going to do while you're in orbit. And being in orbit is like being at your gig where it is irrevocable. If you mess it up or something goes wrong, you have to compensate, or else you're going to burn up, you're going to drift away into space, and you're going to blow your gig. So you want to engineer that to be as possible. You want to try and force yourself to encounter every problem that you could possibly have before you get there. I am very specific about how much space I require. So over here, if you could see some scribbles. And there's basically a line on this board here and here, which basically says this is exactly 1.5 meters or 58 3/4 inches. I need this space without question and then by, half a meter deep. This is my space. Nothing will be put there. No turntables, no other live sets. This is solely for my use. And as long as I have that, I should have enough room. And sometimes I ask for just a piece of wood so I can build just a shelf out of boxes or trash or bricks or cinder blocks, whatever's around. Milk crates, beer crates, anything to use as a second tier, because it makes it more comfortable when you're standing there for whether your set's 45 minutes, whether your set's an hour, or whether it's like mine, it's a minimum of an hour and a half. If not, sometimes the longest I've ever played is 4 hours, and that was crippling. I don't ever want to play 4 hours ever again. Most recently, the longest I played was 3 hours, and that required a lot of alcohol. So you want to try and game it to your advantage in every way possible, which brings me back to the instruments. So I have a kit set up here on the 8S, which is all the output assignments, a basic starting sound for each slot, the clock settings, the compression settings for the instruments, etc., etc. Everything is set so that all I have to do is turn the master up all the way, plug in my cables, and at least till I get to the mixer, everything here is gold. The same with the Electribe. I have the volume set and save my live setup pattern with all those volumes set so that when I take those two outputs and put them into the mixer, at least between those two, as long as I get those two mixer outputs right in level, I don't have to sit here and adjust all the levels of all the sounds on the machine itself. So basically you're using the outputs as a bus so that everything coming out is already set in relation to one another. It really helps and takes some time off sitting there fiddling with things, especially if you show up and they're like, yeah, we're sorry we're late. The sound guy, had some problems, or I was fucked up last night and I couldn't get up. I missed my alarm, or your flight was late, or, any kind of shit that takes away from your time during sound check is detrimental to you. So you want to plan around it in advance somehow, any way you can. And that's one of them. So then when you come over to your mixer from all your outputs, like let's just say from my virus, from here, and from here, all of those levels, if you can get those like 6 or 7 sliders adjusted and the gains adjusted in the EQ, that's really all you have to do. At that point, you're almost gold and good to go. So it's one thing to have endless time at a gig and set up beforehand. It's another when you arrive 2 hours before you're supposed to play and it takes 20 minutes to get to the venue. The party's been going for 4 hours. You arrive, you set up, and by the time you're ready to set up, you go take a piss, you get some drinks, and you're ready to go. And the DJ in front of you is going, you ready? You ready? And you're like, let's go. Those situations happen, and you have to be ready for them eventually or, whenever. The saying that I can't stress enough is you practice like you play. And I know in practice you have endless time. So a lot of times I say, okay, I'm going to play for an hour straight right now, or 2 hours straight. And I'm going to use 2 things because I need to feel more proficient at improvising. So you sort of impose some harsher parameters, run uphill with the weights on, so that even if you don't need to do it, you can do it if there's some kind of catastrophic shit, and say the engine has an issue or doesn't turn on, or the virus doesn't turn on, or the Electribe doesn't turn on. If the TR8 doesn't turn on, I could probably wing it with the Electribe and the Novation for drums. It wouldn't be as good, but I could also see if somebody had an an 8S and pop my SD card in, and it would be the same as using mine, basically. I just prefer to use mine because I got the old man labeling here in tape so I could see it really big. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Also, don't ever, at all possible cost, don't ever run MIDI throughs. People will argue with me about this, but I'll tell you, get a powered MIDI through splitter or through box. It will almost always guarantee less problems with MIDI. Using MIDI throughs is a horrible idea because you don't know whether it's a soft through, meaning the data comes in, it gets processed by the machine and then spit to the output or the through, or whether it's a hard through, meaning it comes in and goes straight over to the MIDI through port. No processing at all. And there is no rhyme or reason. It's manufacturer discretion. And a lot of manufacturers don't specify whether it is or not. Because, they kind of want to cut corners and they're like, nobody cares about this shit. They'll just be using USB or no one's going to care. So they cut corners because they know you're not going to care. But chaining MIDI boxes is like a last ditch effort. Like everything else has failed and you're now going to paddle across the North Atlantic in a lifeboat because you don't have another choice. Your ship has sunk. That's pretty much using MIDI through, using onboard MIDI throughs. I don't like them. I don't trust them. Had some bad experiences. I will always use a MIDI through box with power. Unpowered ones are a terrible idea because you never know if your machine, that's the master clock, is sending power or not, because if it doesn't, your box doesn't work because it isn't magic. It needs power to buffer the data. So MIDI through boxes, always spend the $60, $100, whatever it is. You can get them for under $100, and if you're going to play live, highly recommend you have one that you use live. They're great. They're cheap and they function, and they keep your MIDI data from hosing up or getting jammed or lagging or anything like that. So there you go. This setup has no CV, no pulse triggers, no Euro rack, because all of those things entail more than I wish to carry with me. I want to be able to. My ultimate goal is to put everything in my travel backpack, which is a full-size carry-on backpack that's been hollowed out to fit my essential items. It fits the 8S, it fits the engine, it fits the virus, it fits the circuit, and it fits this guy, and it fits the compressor. The Electribe is pretty delicate, so I carry that in a old laptop, like a small laptop bag, which is my personal bag, so I can have hands on that guy at all times. The only time I take off my backpack when I'm traveling is if I'm on a small, like 3-row regional jet that has the super small overhead bags area. But even then, I can just about get it in. Or I can usually convince the steward or stewardess that, the flight attendant, sorry, I can usually convince them that, can you put this kind of back there or on an open seat or something, or just kind of shove it between my legs and no one will notice. There's usually a way around it somehow. I don't like to gate check that stuff because those people throw your shit and they handle it like it was, a bunch of fucking socks and shampoo. They just beat the shit out of it. And that's why I'm carrying it, because I don't want you to touch it. I want me to touch it, because then it's my fault if it's broken, not yours. And there's really nothing you can do if the airlines mess your stuff up. I mean, you can try, but they ain't going to do anything. Anyway, so my ultimate goal is to just have that backpack so I can actually have a personal bag for personal stuff. Like, I don't know, I could take a small laptop and watch movies and not get bored. I mean, I use my phone, but I have a system that works, but I'm always looking to make it a little more efficient, which is why I dropped the microbrute. I used to have people get the microbrute for me because they're still pretty much everywhere, but they're not as popular now, so it's harder for people to get it. And they've changed the OS that you have to use an older OS to put the sequencer You have to actually hook it up to an editor, change the sequencer setting from the stock setting to make it sync to MIDI correctly without having to hold the key. I don't know why they do that. It's stupid. Anyway, so I kind of dropped it and have adapted other ways. That's pretty much it. I don't really use any outboard effects live other than the DD7. And you'll notice, I don't know if you can see, but the pedal part of the DD7 is missing. When I went through all of my instruments to try and drop weight, that was the first one I looked at because I'm like, man, Boss makes a really beefy, heavy-duty pedal to take some good like stomps when you're playing the guitar, or to use your foot. Your foot is a much more crude instrument than your fingers. And it's really hard to use it for tap tempo because you have to like click it, and it's really tough. So I was like, maybe I can take it out of that case and put it into a different case like I did with the MB. So I took it apart to experiment, and when I took the pedal part off, I realized it's just a 12 millimeter tactile switch underneath. And I was like, huh. So you can just tap it with your finger like that. You can tap, 3/4 time. You can tap like dotted, you can tap, it would be, I guess, a dotted 16th, almost 24th notes. You can tap dotted eighths, like 12ths. It's really great. You can tap 3/4 time stuff. Super, super great. And then I also took off the giant rubber pad that's across the entire bottom. So that cut its weight in half right there. And it also meant that I used to take a Boss FS5 foot switch with it so I could use my foot to tap in while my hands were doing other things. So I could tap the tempo with my foot while I'm, editing drums or making a pattern up or shit like that. So I dropped the weight there. I dropped 3/4 of the weight of the MB33 by making the case out of cabinet laminate plastic from the wood shop I work at, as opposed to the really nice like 3/32 inch steel or 3/64 inch steel. So I dropped weight there. I dropped weight there. The Virus, I made walnut sides for mine, and then I realized that the back panel of the Virus literally is half of the weight. It's a giant steel panel that makes the Virus feel substantial. The front is a steel panel too, but it's like 60% of the machine. So if you can drop 40%, so what I did is I made an aluminum, like a really thin aluminum sides and bottom that were all one piece like a U, that I dropped over half the weight of the Virus from it. So that alone enabled me to fly without having to pay overweight baggage on almost every European airline minus Ryanair. I could do it on EasyJet. I could do it on Buzz when that was still around. Ryanair, I refuse to fly on Ryanair, and I will not go to the gig if I'm on a Ryanair flight. Absolutely not. Ryanair is a big absolute zero. But who knows? There may not be any flying anywhere anymore after all this. We don't really know. This is all pre-COVID, so all bets are off as to what the future holds. Anyway, so dropping weight. So I was able to drop a lot of weight off of my travel, and not bringing cables drops a lot more off weight because, cables are metal wire with insulation. So and especially if you have metal ends, they add to the weight too. So you kind of have to think of all this crap to make your life easier and more pleasant if you're going to play out and travel, or hoping to. You want efficient machines that offer you flexibility but not too much that you're lost. You want to be able to have kind of oh shit buttons and have sort of like a backup parachute and a parachute. If you're not going to land in the water, you're going to need a parachute. And even if you land in the water, it's still like hitting concrete. So you have to plan that things will go bad at some time. And you have to be able to find ways around them and out of them, which I'll go into in another video. So basically, that roundabout sums up my live set. MB33 Retro. Novation circuit. Korg Electribe ES2. For this case, it's the Microbrute, which I normally don't use now. A Boss DD7, Future Retro Swinks, Roland TR-8S, main star of the show. He's the band leader. He's master clock. All the time, every time, no questions asked. Future, Social Entropy Engine to sequence the virus and the MB33 Retro. It's a very comprehensive setup. You can do everything from ambient to industrial to noise to broken beat to, you can pretty much go anywhere as long as you can understand the format that you want to make. So there you go. That's all of it. I hope it was, and the Mighty Bright. I can't forget him because he's part of the show too. He's just as important because if it's going to be real hard to play in the dark. So that's the whole crew. FMR, RNC, stereo compressor, run it from the main mix right through there. And the reason is I sometimes play back to back with DJs. It's almost as if I'm a record and I mix into them, then they mix into me, I mix into them, etc., because I can sync by ear because I'm not a machine. Anyway, I realized early on that the DJs are playing mastered, well done, finished tracks, and I'm giving like a raw, wildly dynamic mix off of the desk. That's cool if you're not trying to go back and forth. DJs consistently will be at least, 5, if not 10 dBs hotter and more present in the club than you will. So at first I used to travel with an Alesis 3630 that I had laying around. And then I was like, there's got to be something smaller that's a little better quality. And I found the RNCs and I'm like, oh my God, they're a really nice compressor. They use a DBX VCA circuit. So they're kind of like a half digital, half analog compressor. They're analog where it matters, but there's digital control. And they're in a plastic and aluminum box, and they're stereo. So they're perfect as your master bus compressor from your live mix desk out to the main system. And you don't have to squash it or crazy crush and limit it. You just set it so that you're kind of taking off, maybe, max of 5 or 7 dB, and then you're boosting it up a little bit so that you're raising your minimum bar higher so that you can compete and sound just as good within reason as the DJs who you're playing with. If not better, because you have absolute sonic control of every track. So you have to, that's one more step in the process that, took me a very, very, very long time to figure out, that I now gift to you that's sort of, well, why wouldn't you do that? Well, because it was impossible for a long time and nobody thought about it. So there you go. That's all the players in the show. Hope you enjoyed, and I hope it was useful. Thanks.